The Edmonton Oilers were active in free agency on opening day, signing two familiar faces and another that is more unheralded, a defenseman from the Los Angeles Kings organization by the name of Kevin Gravel. Who, you might ask? Until this past weekend, I had never heard of him either. He's got good size. He is listed at 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighs around 212 pounds, and he is a left shot D-man. The scouting report on Gravel is that he is a very good skater for his size, including a good first step, and he is very agile on his skates as well. His defensive positioning is described as exceptional, and he has an excellent point shot. His strength is definitely in the defensive end of the ice. Sounds like a pretty solid prospect who has also played 65 regular season games for the Kings. He is still relatively young at 26. Defensemen typically take longer to develop, especially the bigger ones. He was drafted in the 5th round in 2010. In 2016-2017, he played 49 games with the Kings and was expected to take a big step forward and become a regular. Yet he didn't crack the lineup out of training camp last year. He seems to have taken a step back. Sounds like a typical young defenseman struggling to find consistency. I read on and I learned that Kevin Gravel is not just your typical young athlete. I'm not taking anything away from the many athletes who are working hard to live their dreams, but I was particularly touched and inspired by Kevin Gravel. You see, Kevin Gravel went through a life-changing event which has hampered his development somewhat. In and around mid-summer of 2017, signs started to glaringly appear that something was wrong. Midsummer is around the time that most hockey players start to accelerate their conditioning, something that Gravel was no stranger to doing. But this time it seemed to be a more difficult feat than he had ever previously experienced. He would come home from his workouts and he would have no energy at all. He thought that maybe he needed to sleep more or perhaps eat better. And I'm sure even some self-doubt began to creep in as well, that he was maybe getting older and not able to handle this anymore. It was at the urging of his girlfriend that he went to go see a doctor and get checked out. The results pointed to Crohn's disease, which is something that Gravel had never even heard of before. The definition of Crohn's disease is that it is an inflammatory disease of the intestines that causes fatigue, intense abdominal pain, and weight loss, among other things. Gravel was immediately admitted to a hospital in Minneapolis, which is where he is from, and at one point he had lost 40 pounds, 20 in a span of 3 days. His girlfriend barely recognized him. Can you imagine the stress and anxiety she must have been under watching the man that she loved go through this? One minute she's happily supporting her man as he prepares for training camp, and the next minute she finds herself at his hospital bed, barely able to recognize him. Life was literally turned upside down in a matter of moments. Within 2 weeks of treatment, which now sounds like not a very long time, but in the moment it must have felt like an eternity for Gravel and his loved ones, Gravel was able to resume normal life activity. This was great news, from a life perspective at least, but the state of his body that he was in now after going through the trauma and such a rapid loss of weight, it must have been excruciating to see. It is easy for everyone on the outside to say, look at the big picture. At least you're able to live life. It could have been worse. Yes, it could have been worse, but for someone with a path, someone with a dream, to have it derailed like that in such a manner at the snap of a finger, that has got to be absolutely devastating. The cause of the disease is unknown. Gravel does not have a family history. He's still on medication and likely will be for the rest of his life. Now that he was out of the hospital, he had to start focusing on building his body back up, one step at a time. As mentioned, coming out of the 2016-17 season, the Kings felt that Gravel would come into camp the next season with the edge to make the team. The bout with Crohn's was a major setback, and there is no doubt that it impacted his chances gravely. While Gravel did recover enough to attend training camp with the Kings in the fall of 2017, the strength and the quickness simply was not there, and he was beat out by the likes of Curtis McDermott and Oscar Fantenberg. He would start the year in the AHL. More disappointment for Gravel, as he wasn't the Kings' first call-up either early on in the regular season. Here's a guy who had aspirations of making the opening night roster, and he was well on his way
until he was dealt with this blow seemingly out of nowhere and something he had absolutely no control over. Without a shadow of a doubt, this has to be extremely disheartening for Grable. He had every excuse to be bitter and even give up. No, that's not what he did. Instead, Grable stayed positive, he fought back and worked really hard. In December, Grable was called back up by the Kings. He didn't really leave them with much choice. He was playing really well in the minors. As described by Kings head coach at the time of his call-up, he was probably the best defenseman in the organization that was not in the NHL. Grable ended up playing 16 games with the Kings in 2017-18. I think this is an amazing accomplishment. When your conditioning and training gets derailed midway and you end up in the hospital for 2 weeks, you lose 40 pounds, 20 in a period of 3 days. Luckily though, it is not worse and you were able to get back on your feet, but you're set so far back. You have to put aside the emotions, the anger, the frustration that you are no doubt feeling. That takes a lot of mental toughness. It has to start with the mindset and attitude, and all of his coaches had plenty of positive things to say about his poise, work ethic, his positive attitude, and above all, he is very coachable. The Kings decided not to bring Grable back, so he was now a free agent. Not for long as the Oilers came calling on the first day of free agency. They signed him to a 1-year, 2-way contract, which will pay Grable $700,000 if he stays in the NHL. He'll be guaranteed $450,000 regardless. He is the underdog coming into a new organization where he will be battling for the 7th defenseman role with the Oilers against some faces that are already familiar with the organization. It is a low-risk move for the team. At worst, he's an insurance policy and some depth in case of injury, and at best he contributes to the success of the team at a very reasonable cap hit. I, for one, am pulling for Grable to make this team, and to play, and to contribute. You can't help but pull for a guy who has been through what he has. I'd love to hear more from this young man, about his story and how he was able to battle all the way back and earn another opportunity to fulfill his dream of playing in the NHL. Please share this video with others who you feel may find inspiration from this story. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Thank you for watching.